poetry and essays have appeared in The Sun, Oxford American, Gettysburg Review, and at the Bladington Museum. Her op-eds and advocacy pieces have been published in the Washington Post, Texas Tribune, Statesman, and Huffington Post. For nearly a decade, she directed Free Minds, a program offering free humanities classes to adults who have faced barriers to college. She's a voice for educational equity, a zealous sharer of poems, and a maker of first-class soups. She has been known to finish off a pint of Ben & Jerry's fish food in one sitting, but she'll stop for chocolate ice cream of any variety. Welcome today.
I come carrying tea, and I'm hoping that I have enough voice to project tonight. I've been coughing a lot this week. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. Thank you to Chandra and Anar for inviting me part of this evening, and thanks to Malvern, which every time I come here and I see this beautiful space that's made just for readings, it's really a big gift to the literary community in Austin, and I'm glad to be here. So I write poetry and essays, and for the last couple of years I've been writing things that sort of bridge the two, sort of flash nonfiction pieces that are sort of compressed stories, and I'm going to read 2 or maybe 3 of those tonight. What they have in common is that each of these is sort of set in a state of movement or travel and deals with encountering something that's really larger than the self. So the first one is set in my hometown. I grew up in Pompano Beach, Florida, which is in South Florida near Fort Lauderdale. And when I was growing up there in the 70s and 80s, Pompano had basically 2 claims to fame. One is that we were the spot of the spring training for the Texas Rangers. So less than half mile from my house, where we had our flag football tournaments in the fall. In the spring, the Rangers were there, in the winter training. And the other claim to fame is what I'm writing about tonight, or reading tonight. And this is called Goodyear. The blimp moved to town the year I turned 11. At the municipal airport, they built a hangar, and on the day of its arrival, Mayor Emma Lou Olson cut a bright ribbon. Some kids skipped school to board the bucket below its belly and toured the town from above. I was not those kids. I was still new here, still willing my hair to grow out after life made my mother cut it crew cut short, still wondering who my friends would be. After school, I climbed on my bike and watched for the blimp. Where was it? Maybe out over the ocean, cruising by the tall condo towers owned by retirees. Maybe further south, peering over homes with canals and docks. Where was it? Maybe wandering past the fashion square where the candy shop owner set out samples of white chocolate. Finally, I heard the buzz of its engine, and there it came, right up my street. I placed myself directly below the blimp, and I rode. Block after block, beyond the high school stadium and the public pool and all those houses with weedy lots. I pumped my legs, swerved around broken glass, lifted myself off the seat to take the curbs. The blimp slid above me, leading the way. It hummed. It cast a shadow. The whole town was looking up that day, awaiting this new presence like an ungainly god. Everything that would happen to me in that place had yet to happen. I was a girl then, racing to keep up, waving my arm over my head. I stayed with the blimp until it traveled past Federal Highway and I had to turn home. This next piece involves a month that I spent walking on the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage trail in northern Spain 3 or 4 years ago. And the Camino is a Catholic pilgrimage trail, and even though people mostly don't walk it for that reason anymore, and that wasn't why I was walking it, there's something incredibly powerful in being in a place where people have walked through their faith for 1,000 years. And this is titled Carrion de los Condes, which is a town about halfway between the French mountains and Santiago de Compostela, where the pilgrimage ends. And each night in that town, they hold a mass for the pilgrims that are coming through. And one of the aspects of that mass is that the priest calls out the names of countries, and pilgrims raise their hands if they're from those countries. And that's part of what's going on in this piece. So it's called Carrion de los Condes. It was the way the nun's eyes looked straight into yours. It was the ancient incense smell of the church. It was the other nun translating slowly, laughing at her mistakes. It was the priest, China, South Korea, Japan, naming the countries of the world. It was the hands going up. It was Pamela and her purple glasses, Pamela who had worked at the Met and cropped her hair close to her head. It was that from here on for you, it would be buses and trains to the end. No more walking, no more churches. No, it was the priest. Mexico, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Colombia. It was the pilgrims gathered around the altar. It was the hands going up. Chile, Argentina. It was the little paper stars the nuns cut out and colored one by one, paper stars that offered to each of you. It was Nieve who drew you into her backyard and filled your hands with grapes, figs, apples before pulling a chair into the shade. It was how hard you worked to talk to each other. It was the priest, Australia, New Zealand. It was the hands going up, a couple from South Africa, a group of Canadians. It was how many steps it took to get there, the fields of shorn wheat, of turnip greens, the vineyards just about ready for harvest. It was the deep clay of Rioja worked into the grooves of your shoes. It was how little the rest mattered, blisters, the wicking clothing, the question of top bunk or bottom. It was the priest. For 700 years, pilgrims have stood before this altar. It was the nun in her halting translation. It was the hands in the air. It was the nun in her white habit making the sign of the cross on your head, the nun who insisted on meeting your eye. It was the priest, France, Spain, Italy, Switzerland, Austria, Germany. It was the woman who saw you crying and wrapped herself around you, stranger with her hands in your hair that made you cry even harder. And one fun thing about that piece is that before I went away, Charlotte told me that I needed to write a piece about wicking clothing because so much of preparation for the Camino is about thinking that you need the right gear. And then after I wrote that piece, I was like, there's your wicking clothing. So. And the final piece I'm going to read tonight is a piece that grew out, again, from travel, this time a road trip. In 1946, my maternal grandmother took a road trip across the country from Connecticut to California and back with 3 girlfriends. And in 2006, I traced and repeated that exact journey, leaving on the same day that she left from Connecticut in front of what had been her house, and driving across the country as much as possible, trying to stay where she stayed and travel where she's traveled. And I did that with 4 friends in succession, 2 of which are here. Lori and Kirk both came on that trip with me, in different parts of it, so I'm excited they're here and getting to hear this. I spent a number of years after that trying to work on a memoir about that journey. That memoir really never came together, but over the years, little pieces of it have sort of been able to be scooped up and turned into something else. And so this is one of those pieces. It's titled, Forgive Me, South Dakota. Forgive me, South Dakota. I didn't plan to hate every one of your flat, grassy miles. All day driving, the sun searing, the semis coming at me on this 2-lane highway, then blasting past in a cloud of dust. All day driving, I told myself, I can stop. I can abandon the plan, make up the distance tomorrow, find a clean bed in a faceless hotel, sleep. South Dakota, you weren't having it. Each town the same, a railroad crossing, a grain elevator, a small shop to buy potato chips and a Coke. No hotel, no place to stop as a woman on the road alone, a small-boned woman ill-equipped for the masculinity of the plains. You kept me on track with your clear disinterest. All the way to Pierre, all the way to Rapid City, you gave me teenagers walking the highway in white shirts blazed in black, choose life. You gave me farmers in baseball caps leaning over plates of eggs. You gave me 1,000 signs for wall drugs, the bleak majesty of the Badlands. All of this while I drove on, my life so tiny behind the wheel of a rented Chevy Malibu. I didn't want to travel alone, but Dana's left eye wept all the way through Wisconsin. A scratched cornea, the doctor said. I'm going home, Dana said. Goodbye, I said in a Hampton Inn parking lot in Rochester, Minnesota. She took her suitcase. I kept the cooler full of peach Snapples. South Dakota, I traveled with her absence beside me. I traveled with my grandmother's journal as my guide. She drove your roads in 1946 when she and 3 friends set out after the war, coast to coast, Connecticut to California and back, 23 days. When I found the journal in a box of photos, I traced its places. Then I followed them, trailing my grandmother right out of my office with its gray cubicles, out of the home where I hung the curtains by hand. "I'll be back in a month," I called over my shoulder. "Show me the way," I whispered to her spirit. I drove where she drove, led by the bold sweep of her script. Murdochsville, Joliet, road by road, beholding to a schedule that wasn't my own. La Crosse, Rochester. Then I crossed your state line, entered the endless distances of Highway 14. I paused in Pierre, blasted through Midland and Quinn, en route to a bland lunch at the Hotel Alex Johnson. She ate there, so I ate there. A slot machine glowed in the corner. On June 19th, my grandmother wrote, "Went and saw Mount Rushmore. It was beautiful. Wouldn't have missed it for the world." She wrote, "Dinner at the State Game Lodge. What a steak." She wrote, "Played bridge and looked at the moon." On June 19th, I saw Mount Rushmore. I snapped a picture and kept driving. The skies were darkening, rain clouds loomed. Only 20 miles to a room at the lodge, to a bed, to a meal. Only 20 miles more after all day driving. Then the first switchback. Gone was the long straight highway, the grasslands spreading limitlessly. Now the forest was thick, the roads curving, lightning, then rain. I slowed to a crawl. I kept crawling. My grandmother didn't tell me 20 miles can be so many things. Bend after bend, rising and falling, the road blocked, buffalo illuminated in my headlights. Beat the horn before the one-lane bridge, use the brights, squint into blackness, turn another curve. Forgive me, South Dakota, it isn't your fault. I wasn't prepared for the miles so abstract before I crossed them, for the ache in my hands as they gripped the wheel, for the anger in Dana's set jaw. I wasn't prepared for the way you turned from open and tawny to dense and dark. I only thought about how to go. I didn't know how much I would want to stop. 2 hours later, I reached the State Game Lodge. I left banana peels moldering in the car, the spiral-bound atlas open on the seat. Climbing the stairs to the paisley bedroom that may have been the exact one my grandmother slept in, I paused. There was the dining room with its walls lined with pheasants. "Sorry, ma'am," said the host at the desk. "The kitchen is already closed." For that moment, I was released from the bounds of the journal. No steak tonight then, no bridge, no moon. Thank you.